Lee Teng-hui was born in 1923 in Japanese-controlled Taiwan. He was an important agricultural economist and earned a PhD from Cornell University. In 1984, as more Taiwanese officials were being appointed to the Chinese nationalist Kuomintang government, Lee Teng-hui's civil service skills caught the attention of then-President Jiang Jingguo, who asked the National Assembly to appoint him as vice president. In 1988, following Jiang's death, Lee Teng-hui became president, making him the first president born in Taiwan. In the years that followed, Lee began a series of political reforms. In 1995, he visited the United States to deliver a speech at his alma mater, Cornell University, raising Taiwan's international visibility and drawing Beijing's attention. Later, China conducted military exercises in the Taiwan Strait. The following year, Taiwan held its first fully open democratic election, and Lee became Taiwan's first elected president. International media referred to him as Mr. Democracy. In 1999, during a sit-down interview with Deutsche Welle, he proposed that cross-strait relations be defined as special state-to-state relationship. China rejected the proposal. In 2000, he stepped down from the presidency, handing power over to Chen Shui-bian of the Democratic Progressive Party following Chen's election. For the next 20 years, until his death in 2020, Lee Teng-hui remained an influential figure in Taiwan's democracy and identity movements.
For today's episode of Zoom In, Zoom Out, we're talking to Lin Hsiao-ting. He's a research fellow and curator of the Modern China and Taiwan collection at the Hoover Institution. Lin researched diplomatic cables from several countries and wrote a book called The Lee Teng-hui Era and the Reinvention of Taiwan to spark discussions on how we should understand Lee Teng-hui's legacy today.
When we talk about Lee Teng-hui, he was always been associated with Taiwan's democratization and his political reforms in the 1990s. So this book is not just about a personal biography of Lee Teng-hui, but also about how Taiwan as a piece of land has been transformed from an authoritarian regime to a fully democratized system. So before President Lee took office in early 1988, Taiwan was virtually being ruled by two President Chiang, President Chiang Kai-shek and Jiang Jingguo. They lost China after the Civil War. So throughout their lives, their ultimate goal was to restore China, restore mainland, and then they want to relocate the whole regime back to China. But after Lee Teng-hui inaugurated, he had a totally different mindset. He was a native Taiwanese. He didn't have any burden about recovering the whole lost land. So I believe that the way he perceived China, the way he perceived cross-strait relations, definitely would be different from his predecessors. So he would probably take a very, very pragmatic stance toward how cross-strait relations should be reshaped. And then that definitely would have to do something to do with a redefinition of what the Republic of China really meant. So I think throughout his tenure as president of the ROC, he would think about this throughout his time.
I think there's the core value that you highlight about Lee's political term. Taiwan is a key thing that he really wants to let the world know, right?
I think everybody knows that Lee Teng-hui had a very, very complicated self-identity. He was born as a Japanese citizen, during the colonial rule. And then after Japanese surrender in 1945, he suddenly became a citizen of China, a Chinese citizen, after Taiwan returned to the Chinese orbit. And then after February 28 massacre in 1947, he wanted to say goodbye to China. He had such a strong kind of identity, deeply rooted on the soil of Taiwan. So I think afterwards, no matter what he did or where he had been whether in study in the United States or in Japan or entering the Kuomintang regime, entering the system to serve in the government, the most core issue, I think the most important element in his mind, I think, is about the localization. How Taiwan, the politics of Taiwan should become more and more localized and more attached to the people, to the local population, rather than thinking about those remote lost land across the strait.
How do you think that the lesson or the findings that you have can reflect to this current situation that Taiwan is facing?
I don't think it's appropriate to make a comparison between what Lee Teng-hui's era, what happened 30 years before, and what was facing President William Lai today. But I do think there are some similarities in between. The most important thing to the current leadership in Taiwan is to maximize your policy options when you face those external challenges, whether from China or from other international surroundings. During Lee Teng-hui's tenure, he was trying hard to rid out of the so-called One China policy imposed by the US government and by the Chinese government. So he tried his best to maximize his policy options. He would try to attempt to purchase more military equipment, not from the United States, but from Russia and from other countries, different countries. He would try to attempt to contact North Korean regimes in order to try to get more intelligence or more information from this very, very weird country, the so-called enemy countries. So I would say that Lee Teng-hui had this kind of mindset in his mind. He wants to maximize Taiwan's strength. He wants to get the best benefit out of all this kind of flexibility. I don't know whether Taiwan nowadays, Taiwan still have the similar leverage that Lee Teng-hui had.
So in the book or throughout the finding when you're researching for the book, I think there are two major or unexpected findings that you came through. Can you, the first one is 1995, Lee Teng-hui got to go to Cornell University to give a speech, right? Can you give us like a brief highlight of your discovery of this incident?
There are three parties in this game, Taiwan, and then China, PRC, and the United States. So then we all know that Lee Teng-hui eventually visited the United States. He went back to Cornell and then to give a talk. And then he was able to allow Taiwan to become so internationally recognized throughout his visit, during his visit. But I find it interesting is that, different parties, they harbor different kind of perception towards the same event. To the United States, to President Clinton, he agreed to grant entry visa to President Lee was because of the conflict infight between the legislative branch and between the executive branch, because he had a very, very bad terms with Newt Gingrich. By allowing Lee Teng-hui to visit the United States, he tried to sort of like improve the frosty relations between the executive branch, between the White House and the Congress. And so he even thought about this from a personal, emotional perspective. For example, he had a very, very deep disdain towards President Jiang Zemin. He thinks that Jiang Zemin did not show full respect to him, back in the event. And then so he said, look, President Lee, he was a great reformer. He has such a great achievement in Taiwan. Lee Teng-hui believed that his visit to the United States was an enhancement of Taiwan's international visibility. It's a great strategic breakthrough. It's something that he definitely needs to achieve. Three leaders in three parties, they had harbored different perceptions.
And then another finding is that you described like a tense 1998 dispute with the White House accusing Taiwan's military of exaggerating tensions across the strait. Also, can you briefly elaborate on that?
That accident happened with the background of a very, very worsening atmosphere, a worsening situation, worsening bilateral relations between Taipei and Washington, D.C. That was a time when President Clinton endeavored to improve its relations with China, and then they want to create some kind of strategic partnership between the two countries. So they would try, the Clinton administration would try every possible ways to prevent Taiwan from becoming a troublemaker in the building of this kind of strategic partnership. And then, so he did not try to intend to exaggerate the cross-strait relations or the tension happening in the cross-strait area. However, the White House national security guys, they interpret Taiwan's accusation of the cross-strait tensions as a way of trying to sabotage, U.S.-China friendly relationship. That's really, really unfortunate, I would say, from Taiwan's perspective. But unfortunately, that happened with that kind of special historical background.
But then we know that in September, there will be like a Trump-Xi meeting in the U.S. Could the ruling government actually learn something from what happened back then with the upcoming Trump-Xi meeting in the U.S.?
I think that no matter who become the president of Taiwan, he or she should understand that you should never really rely on a foreign country or foreign government. You still have to rely on your own national strength and try to transform your economic or technological powerhouse, your AI, your all that kind of chips, all that kind of thing, trying to make the best use of your Taiwan's own economic and technological strength and try to maximize your policy options. I think that's what Lee Teng-hui did 30 years ago. That was a time when Taiwan had a very, very strong, very, very robust, economic power, and he was trying his best to transform that kind of strength, economic strength, into something in the international arena, in the diplomatic, arena.
And throughout the research period, you actually went through the classified or declassified cables from the UK and France, and also in Japan. And then you came across some unexpected findings as well. Can you share a bit about that too?
I find that, based on the declassified CIA documents, State Department document, White House document, and also from the Foreign Office of the British government, from Japanese Foreign Office, they didn't have supernatural power. They would still have misjudgment about Taiwan, about Taiwan's domestic politics, about Lee Teng-hui as president of Taiwan. But I would like to say, as a historian, I think even that kind of misjudgment is also part of history. The most notable example is how they interpret Lee Teng-hui's future position within the Kuomintang hierarchy when he just became president of ROC. Most of the foreign government, they predict that in the post-Chiang Ching-kuo era, Taiwan will be ruled as a collective leadership rather than by a strong man, because you no longer have like Chiang Kai-shek or Chiang Ching-kuo, like a political power, like an authoritarian leader. But it turns out that within short, like 2 or 3 years, he was able to rid out of those, factional rivalries, all that kind of those factions against him, and he was able to graduate to center. To collect the power and center the power into his own hand so that he can move forward and then to continue his reform work. I think that's really amazing. And then I don't think that in the late 80s, any foreign government will be able to foresee that.
How do you wish, the Taiwan society and the international society to take away from the lesson that you shared?
I want to let the younger generation readers understand that the democracy, the democratization now you enjoy in this society is not really, it's not really a natural thing. It's not, there's a painful process. It's not really like a free given from heaven, something that, you're born to enjoy this kind of democracy. You need to know that this is a kind of, it's a difficult, painful process. There's a lot of power struggling. There was a lot of kind of difficult historical moment when you need to handle all that kind of painful things, and it's no easy job. But now we are able to enjoy this democracy, and we should cherish that.
Dr. Lee, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure.
This has been Zoom In, Zoom Out. You can find more stories from TaiwanPlus News by following us on social media. Hope you enjoyed the show. Until next time.